My name is Clara, and at 68 years old, I thought I had already lived through the darkest chapters of my life. I was wrong. What happened that night? What my granddaughter whispered to me. It shattered every quiet belief I held about my family, about safety, about the people we trust most. It began so simply. Lily, my sweet, gentle 8-year-old granddaughter, showed up at my doorstep for what was supposed to be just one night. My daughter-in-law had messaged me only an hour before, saying she needed to work late. She sounded rushed, almost frantic, but I didn't think much of it. I was just happy to see my little girl again. But the moment Lily stepped inside, I felt something was terribly off. She didn't smile. She didn't run into my arms the way she always did. Her small hand clung to her worn teddy bear, Barnaby, as if she were afraid someone might rip him away. And her eyes, those usually bright, innocent eyes, looked hollow, like she had been carrying a secret too heavy for a child to hold. I knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer. Not at first. She just stared at the floor, trembling slightly. Then she leaned in close, so close I could feel her tiny breath against my ear, and whispered, "Grandma, please don't tell Mom I told you." My heart stilled. Her voice quivered as though every word hurt. She looked around the room as if she expected someone else to be listening, someone hiding just out of sight. The fear in her eyes made my stomach twist. When she finally told me what she had seen, what her mother had done, I felt my legs weaken beneath me. My spoon slipped from my fingers and clattered against the floor, loud enough to echo through the quiet kitchen. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands shook uncontrollably, and a cold dread settled deep into my chest. Her words changed everything. And in that instant, before I even fully understood the weight of her confession, I knew I had to act. I walked to the phone with trembling fingers, and dialed the number I never expected to call on my own family. The police. What I didn't know then was that Lily's whisper was only the beginning. I didn't yet know how deep the darkness went, or how much danger my family was truly in. Before I go any further, my dears, if you're listening to this, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It means more than you know to have someone out there hearing my voice, especially on nights when the memories feel heavier than I can carry alone. And if you don't mind, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I truly love knowing how far these stories travel, how many hearts they touch. Alright, now let me take you back to that night. The night when everything in my quiet little world began to crumble. My house sits at the edge of a quiet neighborhood just outside Savannah. An old, creaking place with peeling white paint and a porch that sighs under its own age. That evening, the sky hung low and heavy, a silvery haze settling between the trees. The kind of weather that makes the world feel smaller, like something is pressing down from above. I remember standing at the kitchen window as the street lamp flickered against the dusk, casting long trembling shadows across my yard. I had just finished warming a pot of soup when I heard hurried footsteps on the gravel path. When I opened the door, my daughter-in-law, Megan, stood there with Lily beside her. Megan was usually composed, always put together, meticulous about every detail in her appearance. But that night she looked frayed. Her hair was hastily tied back, her eyes darting from the yard to the street, scanning the darkness as if she expected someone, or something, to step out of it. "Can she stay the night?" she asked quickly. Her voice had a sharp edge I wasn't used to. She didn't offer an explanation beyond that she had to work. And before I could ask anything more, she bent down and kissed Lily's head with a hurried, shaky motion. Lily didn't move. The child just stood there, clutching her teddy bear so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't even whisper goodbye to her mother. She kept her eyes down, her shoulders curled inward like she wanted to disappear. "Honey, did something happen at school today?" I asked gently as I guided her inside. She shook her head, but the movement was too stiff, too rehearsed, like she'd practiced answers she wasn't allowed to change. As Megan turned to leave, she paused on the porch. She looked at me, really looked, and for a split second, her face softened with something I can only describe as fear. Not annoyance, not exhaustion, genuine fear. Then almost instantly she masked it, muttered a rushed "thank you." and hurried down the path without another word. The moment her footsteps faded, my house felt eerily silent. I set Lily's small backpack by the sofa and invited her to the kitchen table for dinner. But she barely touched the bowl in front of her. Her shoulders twitched at every small sound. The whistle of the kettle, the creak of the floorboards, even Barnaby's little bell when she shifted in her seat. Something inside that child was trembling, even if she tried to hide it. And as I watched her, a cold knot formed in my chest. Something terrible was weighing on her. Something her mother didn't want me to know. I warmed a fresh bowl of soup, hoping the familiar smell would comfort her. Lily had always loved my cooking, especially on nights when she stayed over. But this time, she didn't even lift her spoon. She stared at the swirling broth as though something inside it frightened her. When I encouraged her gently, she just shook her head, pressing Barnaby tighter against her chest. It wasn't just that she wouldn't eat. It was the way she seemed to fold into herself, as if trying to make her small body invisible. Every question I asked was met with a timid nod or a faint shake of the head. She avoided my eyes entirely. Whenever I knelt down to her height or tried to tuck her hair behind her ear, she flinched. Not dramatically, but just enough for me to notice. That tiny recoil broke something inside me. After dinner, I put on her favorite cartoon, bright colors, cheerful music, but Lily didn't react. Her gaze stayed fixed on the screen, yet she wasn't watching it. She rocked slightly, clutching Barnaby so hard the seams along his belly stretched. The teddy bear looked exhausted, as though he too had been dragged through something terrible. I sat beside her on the sofa, pretending to knit just to stay close. Every now and then her breath hitched, but she forced it back down, swallowing tremors she couldn't control. I didn't want to push her, not yet. I knew children sometimes spoke when they finally felt safe. So I waited. Quietly. Patiently. My heart in my throat. Near bedtime, I noticed an unmistakable fatigue in her eyes, but when I suggested getting ready to sleep, her whole body stiffened. "Can I sleep next to you?" she asked in a tiny voice, one she hadn't used since she was 3. "Of course, sweetheart," I whispered. That night, she curled up beside me on the small daybed, Barnaby tucked under her chin. I stroked her hair until her breathing softened. But peace didn't last. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a soft, broken sound, Lily whimpering. Her small body trembled, and she mumbled through her sleep, voice cracking. Please don't hurt her. Grandma, don't let her." My blood ran cold. I reached over and held her, whispering that she was safe with me. But even unconscious, she clung to my nightgown with desperate strength, her fingers gripping as though someone was trying to pull her away. I lay awake the rest of the night, watching her fragile chest rise and fall, feeling an ache of dread expanding deep inside me. Something had happened to my granddaughter. And whatever it was far worse than a bad dream. Morning light usually brings comfort, but that day it only made the house feel colder. I woke early and prepared breakfast the way I always did when Lily stayed over. Scrambled eggs, warm toast, a bit of honey on the side. The kitchen smelled soft and familiar, but my heart was restless. I kept replaying her frightened whispers from the night before, wondering what nightmare had planted itself in her small mind. When Lily finally shuffled into the room, she looked even more fragile than the night before. Her hair was tangled, her eyes swollen, Barnaby still tucked beneath her arm like a shield. She sat at the table quietly, her little feet barely touching the floor. I placed the plate in front of her. "Sweetheart, did you sleep at all?" She didn't answer. She just nudged a corner of her toast without eating it. I knelt beside her, lowering my voice. "Lily, you know you can tell Grandma anything. Whatever it is, I'm here." That was when she froze. Her small shoulders tightened, and her breathing turned thin and shaky. She lowered her head until her chin nearly touched her chest. For a long moment, she said nothing, only clutched Barnaby as if afraid he'd vanish. Then in the faintest voice she whispered, "Grandma, please don't tell Mom I told you." A cold wave washed through me. "I won't," I said, keeping my voice steady even as a knot formed in my stomach. "But you have to tell me what's frightening you." She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. Her lips trembled. Tears welled along the edges of her lashes, and when they finally fell, They seemed to break the invisible barrier holding her silence hostage. I saw something. At home, she whispered. Something bad. My breath caught. Her fingers twisted in Barnaby's fur, knuckles pale. Mom said not to say anything. She said people wouldn't understand. What did you see, Lily? I asked, though my voice was barely more than a breath. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, then leaned closer, so close her hair brushed my cheek. She locked someone downstairs, she choked out. A little girl. She cries every night, Grandma. I heard her. She said her hands hurt, and she asked for help. The room spun. My spoon slipped from my hand and clattered against the tile, the metallic echo slicing through the silence. I felt my entire body go numb, my heart pounding, my vision blurring at the edges. A child. Another innocent child. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. But Lily's trembling hand reached for mine, and that broke the spell. In that instant, I knew what I had to do. With fingers that wouldn't stop shaking, I reached for the phone. Her words had changed everything. Before I tell you what happened after that moment, I need you to understand something. Something that explains why my heart tore open the way it did. Why the fear in Lily's voice shook me to the core. Why the thought of my daughter-in-law being involved in anything so cruel felt impossible, and yet, devastatingly believable. Because things were not always this way. Years ago, my home was full of light. There was a time when laughter bounced off these walls so often it felt like music. My son's laughter most of all. Alex, my boy. Tall, strong, always dusted with dirt from work, but with a smile that could warm a room even in winter. He was the kind of man who knelt down to tie Lily's shoes, who carried her on his shoulders until she squealed, who held his wife's hand in the kitchen for no reason at all. And Megan, my daughter-in-law, was once part of that warmth. When she first came into our family, she was bright and lively, with a kindness that felt genuine. She'd show up with homemade casseroles, ask me for advice about raising a baby, sit on my porch in the evenings sipping tea as we talked about everything and nothing. She would laugh, really laugh, and say she felt grateful to have a mother figure like me in her life. We weren't just in-laws, we were friends. Back then, everything felt whole. When Lily was born, I became the grandmother who spoiled her with knitted blankets, ribbons, and bedtime stories. Megan would place Lily in my arms saying, "Mom, she loves you already. Do you see how she relaxes with you?" And she was right. Lily always nestled against me like she belonged there. But life has a cruel way of changing in an instant. It happened on a rainy November night I will never forget. The kind of rain that falls sideways, hammering the windows. I got the call just after midnight. A trembling voice on the other end told me there'd been an accident. Alex, my beautiful son, was gone. I can still remember how the phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the hardwood floor. How the world seemed to tilt beneath me. How my scream didn't sound like my own voice at all. The days that followed were a blur of grief, cold, heavy grief that seeped into every part of me. But as deep as my pain was, Megan seemed bottomless. She barely spoke. She barely moved. At the funeral, she stood beside me like a statue, her eyes hollow, her hands shaking. She held Lily against her chest as though afraid someone might take the child away. I tried, truly tried, to be what she needed. I made meals, brought groceries, offered to watch Lily whenever she needed rest. But little by little Megan pulled away. She stopped sitting on my porch, stopped answering calls, stopped dropping by with Lily. One day she packed up and moved across town saying she needed space. And from then on, I only saw my granddaughter on scheduled weekends, never unannounced, never spontaneous, never warm like before. I missed them terribly. But what hurt most was watching Megan change into someone I barely recognized. Her once gentle eyes grew guarded, shadowed. She became unpredictable, one day affectionate toward Lily, the next impatient, tense, withdrawn. And as the years passed, I sensed something fragile breaking inside her, something dark replacing what once was love. Still, I held on to hope. I told myself grief can twist people, but they come back eventually. That the old Megan was buried somewhere under the pain. Then Lily started acting strangely during her visits. She would cling to me for hours, She asked to sleep beside me every time she stayed. She grew quieter, more watchful, like a child who had learned that silence was safer. When I asked her if everything was all right at home, she always said she was fine. But she said it with a trembling smile, a smile that never reached her eyes. And now, hearing her little voice confess what she had seen, I realized the truth. The darkness that had swallowed Megan after Alex's death had never gone away. It had grown, spread, twisted into something dangerous. And my granddaughter had been living in the shadow of it all along. After Lily's confession, my mind raced in circles. Fear pressed against my ribs with every breath, yet a single thought cut through the panic. I need to find out the truth. Not assumptions. Not guesses. The truth. That afternoon, I walked Lily to school myself. Her small hand stayed wrapped around mine the whole way, her grip tighter than usual. She didn't skip or chatter like most children her age. She just walked quietly, glancing over her shoulder every few steps as though expecting someone to follow us. When we reached her classroom, I asked if I could speak with her teacher, Mrs. Harlow, a gentle woman with kind eyes who'd always been good to Lily. She guided me into the staff room, and the moment she closed the door behind us, her expression shifted from polite to concerned. "Mrs. Granderson, has something happened?" she asked. I hesitated. I didn't want to reveal more than I should, not yet. But I needed answers. "I'm just worried about Lily," I began carefully. "She's been quiet, tense, not herself." Mrs. Harlow sighed, folding her hands in front of her. "I've noticed it too," she admitted softly. "More than once." My heart sank. "She startles easily," the teacher continued. "Sometimes she zones out in the middle of class, like she's somewhere else entirely. And her drawings." She opened a nearby drawer and pulled out a few sheets of paper. These concerned me. I took them with trembling hands. At first glance, the pictures looked like ordinary children's doodles. But the longer I studied them, the tighter my stomach twisted. Each drawing showed a small figure standing alone in a dark room. Behind the child were thick, uneven lines, bars. A door drawn in black. Strange scribbles that looked like chains or ropes. And in one drawing, the child's hands were colored red. "She said she was drawing something she saw at home," Mrs. Harlow whispered. I swallowed hard. "Did she say anything else?" "No," the teacher replied. "She shut down completely when I asked." I folded the drawings gently and slipped them into my purse, my pulse thudding in my ears. If Lily was seeing these things, if she was living these things, it meant something terrible was happening, just as she'd told me. On my walk home, I passed by my neighbor, Mr. Wallace, a retired mechanic who'd lived on the street longer than anyone. He was tending to his roses, but when he saw my face he frowned. "You all right, Clara? You look troubled." I paused, unsure how much to share. But something in his steady gaze made me speak. "Have you noticed anything strange around Megan's place lately?" He wiped his hands on a rag, thinking. Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but yes. My breath caught. "A few nights ago," he said quietly, "I saw Megan coming home very late. Past midnight. She wasn't alone. She had a little girl with her, a child I'd never seen before. Looked scared if you ask me." A chill ran through me from head to toe. He continued. "I couldn't make out the girl's face. But it wasn't Lily that I'm sure of." The world around me seemed to stop. Drawings of a child locked in a room. A little girl entering the house at night. Lily's trembling confession. Piece by piece, a horrifying picture was forming. I thanked Mr. Wallace, though my voice barely worked, and hurried home. My pulse hammered through my temples. Something was terribly, terribly wrong at Megan's house. And I feared we were just beginning to uncover the truth. I knew confronting Megan outright would be useless and dangerous, but I needed to understand what Lily was living with. So later that evening, after picking her up from school, I drove her to the park to get some air. She played quietly, barely speaking, but at least she wasn't trembling. For a brief moment, I felt a sliver of calm. That calm didn't last long. While Lily traced slow circles in the sand with a stick, I heard my name being called from behind. It was Janet. A woman I'd known for over 20 years, someone who had baked with me, traded recipes, laughed on my porch. But instead of a warm greeting, she approached with tight lips and an expression I couldn't read. "Clara," she said sharply. "I ran into Megan earlier." My stomach tightened. "Oh," I managed. "Is she all right?" Janet crossed her arms. "Well, she's worried. She said you've been interfering." The word landed like a slap. Interfering. I echoed. Janet nodded. "She told us you're confused lately. Forgetful. Making up stories that are upsetting Lily. She said you accused her of being a bad mother." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I've done no such thing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's been crying, Clara," Janet continued, shaking her head, "saying she doesn't know how to handle your behavior anymore. That you're becoming unpredictable." Unpredictable. A word that cuts especially deep when said about someone my age. Behind her, 2 other mothers had paused their conversation, whispering as they glanced my way. Their eyes held pity, or suspicion. I wasn't sure which hurt more. "I'm just trying to understand what's happening with my granddaughter," I insisted softly. But Janet's expression hardened. "Megan said you've been asking around about her, accusing her of things, dragging neighbors into it." I felt my throat tighten. "I asked because I'm worried about Lily's safety." Janet frowned as if I'd gone too far. As if my concern was proof of instability. A wave of humiliation washed over me, sharp and cold. I was defending myself against lies from someone who once called me family. When I returned home, I noticed my phone buzzing nonstop. 5 unread messages. All from people I knew. "Is everything okay? Megan said you're confused. If you need help, we're here. Are you sure you're all right mentally, Clara?" Each message stabbed deeper than the last. It didn't stop there. At the grocery store the next morning, 2 women I volunteered with at the community center whispered openly as I passed, their eyes flicking away in that polite, painful way people do when they've already drawn conclusions. At the bakery, the cashier, usually cheerful, gave me a tight, cautious smile. And outside the post office, Mrs. Hampton approached me with that soft, pitying tone people reserve for the frail. "Maybe you should take it easy, dear," she said, touching my arm. "You've been through a lot since your son passed. Grief can do things to the mind." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake them all and tell them the truth. But every attempt only made their expressions soften with more pity. The weight of it grew unbearable. The daughter-in-law I had once embraced like a daughter now painted me as unstable, turning the whole community into witnesses against me. And the terrifying part was how easily everyone believed her. How quickly whispers become rumors. How quickly rumors become truth in the eyes of a town. When Lily came home later that day and slipped her small hand into mine, I felt myself break. I wasn't losing just Megan. I was losing my community, my reputation, my sanity, at least in the eyes of others. But the worst part? I knew Megan wasn't doing this because she felt threatened by me. She was doing it because she had something to protect. Something she didn't want anyone to discover. 2 days passed, each one heavier than the last. My name was slipping through the town like a loose thread, pulled, stretched, twisted into something unrecognizable. But while people whispered behind my back, I kept my focus on Lily. Every time she flinched at a sudden sound or clung to my sleeve, my resolve hardened. I needed proof. Something undeniable. Something no rumor could erase. That proof arrived in a way I never expected. Late one afternoon, as I was trimming the hydrangeas in my yard, I heard the familiar squeak of Mr. Wallace's gate. He walked toward me with a careful, hesitant expression, one I'd learned to dread. I braced myself for another gentle lecture. But instead he spoke in a low, urgent voice. "Clara, can we talk inside?" My heart skipped. Of course. Once we stepped into my living room, he closed the door softly behind him. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled a small USB drive from his pocket. "I wasn't sure if I should come to you with this," he said, swallowing hard. "But after what you asked me the other day, I checked my security camera again." A cold shiver ran up my spine. He inserted the drive into my laptop, and as the footage loaded, the room seemed to shrink around me. I watched in rigid silence. The first clip showed Megan arriving home late at night. The timestamp read 12:43 a.m. She stepped out of her car with hurried, frantic movements, checking up and down the street before opening the back door. Then she pulled out a small figure. A little girl. Not Lily. A different child, thin, stumbling, her posture slumped with exhaustion or fear. She wore a long shirt that nearly swallowed her frame, and when Megan dragged her toward the house, the child resisted for just a moment. Megan jerked her forward sharply. My hand flew to my mouth. In the second clip, Megan looked around again, her eyes wild, before shoving the child inside and slamming the door behind them. Mr. Wallace paused the footage and whispered, "Clara. This isn't right. I thought maybe you were worried over nothing, but after seeing this, I knew I had to show you." My eyes stung with tears. My chest tightened so painfully I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't grief. This wasn't confusion or age or rumor. This was real. This was evidence. This was a child in danger. I stared at the frozen image on the screen, the tiny outline of that unknown girl, and my whole world tilted. For the first time since Lily whispered her secret, I felt something sharper than fear. I felt certainty. I stood, grabbed my coat, and thanked Mr. Wallace with a voice that barely held together. My hands did not shake anymore. Not like before. "I'm going back to the police," I said quietly. And this time they would have no choice but to listen. The drive to the police station felt longer than it ever had. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly the skin along my knuckles turned pale. But for the first time in days, my heart wasn't tangled in doubt. I had seen the footage. I had seen the child. And no rumor, no whisper about my sanity, could erase what I witnessed with my own eyes. When I walked through the station doors, the same officer from before looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Last time, he treated me gently, like someone fragile, someone grieving and confused. But this time, I didn't give him the chance to dismiss me. "I need to speak with you," I said, my voice steady. "It's urgent." He hesitated, then motioned me toward a small interview room. The moment the door closed behind us, I set my purse on the table and pulled out the USB drive Mr. Wallace had given me. "I have proof," I said. His eyes sharpened. I plugged the drive into their computer, and together we watched the footage. The room grew impossibly still. Not a word, not a breath. His posture stiffened at the sight of the unknown little girl. The way Megan dragged her inside as if she were nothing more than an object being smuggled in the night. This child," he murmured. "She's not your granddaughter?" "No," I whispered. "I don't know who she is." He replayed the clip twice, then leaned back, frowning deeply. For the first time, I saw genuine concern in his expression. Concern, and something else. Recognition. "We've had a report," he said quietly, almost to himself. "A girl from a nearby county, missing 3 weeks now." He turned sharply toward me. The height looks similar. My pulse quickened. He excused himself and stepped outside the room. Through the door's small window, I watched him call over 2 other officers. They huddled around a computer, comparing the footage to something on their screen. Their hushed voices rose and fell rapidly, tones shifting from doubt to urgency. Minutes later he returned. "Mrs. Granderson," he said firmly, "thank you for coming back. We're taking this very seriously." I felt my shoulders sag with relief so powerful it nearly brought me to tears. "We're assembling a team to investigate immediately," he continued. "But we'll need you to explain everything your granddaughter told you." So I did. Carefully. Word for word. Every tremble in her voice. Every detail she whispered that morning. When I finished, he nodded grimly. "This matches what we've suspected," he said. "There's a chance the missing child is being held somewhere in your daughter-in-law's home." My throat tightened. Megan's house, the place where my son had once lived, where Lily had taken her first steps, was now being spoken of as a crime scene. The officer stood. "We're going to check it out. Today." I clutched the edge of the table, steadying myself. For the first time, the truth wasn't just something I feared. It was becoming something the police could no longer ignore. And although I didn't know it yet, what they were about to find would be far darker than any of us imagined. The air felt heavier than usual as I followed the officers to their vehicles. They didn't ask me to come, but when I hesitated on the station steps, clutching my coat, the lead officer gave a small nod. "You can follow behind us, Mrs. Granderson. Just stay in your car once we arrive." I agreed. I wasn't sure if I wanted to see what they would find, but some force inside me, some deep ache tied to my son, to Lily, to every motherly instinct I'd ever had, refused to let me stay behind. The convoy of patrol cars pulled out of the station, lights flashing silently, slicing through the late afternoon gloom. I followed at a distance, my hands trembling on the wheel. The sky was beginning to bruise purple, the sun slipping behind the trees, casting long, thin shadows across the road. With every mile, my heart pounded harder. By the time we turned down Megan Street, I felt sick. Her house sat near the end of the block, small and tidy on the outside, with cheerful shutters and a neatly trimmed lawn. A picture-perfect home that now pulsed with hidden dread. The police cars fanned out quietly, forming a semicircle. Officers stepped out, hands on their belts, eyes sharp and alert. I parked a few houses down, gripping the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might crack. From where I sat, I saw Megan through the living room window, folding laundry. She looked calm, so normal it almost twisted my stomach into knots. How could someone appear so ordinary when carrying a secret like this inside their walls? The officers approached the door. One knocked firmly. "Police. We need to speak with you." Megan froze. Even from a distance, I could see the moment she realized who was outside. Her body stiffened. She dropped a shirt she'd been folding, her hands trembling as she took a step back. Another knock. Louder. Megan opened the door. She did, but only barely, just enough to reveal half her face. The officer flashed his badge and asked if they could come in. "What is this about?" she snapped, but her voice wavered. "I haven't done anything. We have reason to believe a missing child may be inside this home." Her eyes widened. Fear flashed so quickly across her face that I wasn't sure if she meant to reveal it. Then she tried to slam the door, but the officers pushed inside before it could shut. The sudden shift was chaotic. Footsteps pounding, voices commanding, doors opening, lights sweeping across the walls. Megan backed away, shouting, "Get out! You can't be here. I didn't do anything." Two officers restrained her gently but firmly, keeping her away from the hallway. "Where is the basement?" one asked. She said nothing, just shook her head violently, twisting in their hold. "Check the doors," the lead officer ordered. I sat in my car, breath trapped in my chest, unable to look away. The house that once held birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and warm family dinners was now filled with the sound of authoritative voices and hurried boots against hardwood floors. Then one voice called out sharply from inside. "Over here. This one's locked." Every muscle in my body tensed. An officer tugged at the basement door. "Locked tight." "Megan," the lead officer said, stepping close. "Where is the key?" She stared at him with wild, frantic eyes. "She's lying," she whispered. "I didn't do anything. There's no one down there. There's nothing, just old boxes." But her voice cracked, and the officer heard it. He signaled another officer. "Get the toolkit." I could see Megan's entire body shake as they brought out a crowbar and wedged it against the lock. "No," she screamed. "No, don't open it. You don't understand." The officers exchanged grim looks. The crowbar pressed deeper. Metal groaned. Wood splintered. Megan let out a sob that made my skin crawl. And then the door gave way. The officers disappeared down the stairs, flashlights sweeping across the dark. From my car, I couldn't see inside, but I could hear the faint echo of footsteps, then a sudden sharp inhale from one of them. "Officer Hayes," a voice called. "You need to see this." My heart slammed against my ribs. Minutes passed like hours. Then one of the officers reappeared holding a small, fragile figure wrapped in a blanket. Even at a distance, I could see the girl's thin legs, her trembling arms clutching the fabric. Her face was hidden against the officer's chest, but her small frame shook with silent sobs. I pressed a hand to my mouth. Another child. A missing child. A living child. The officer carried her quickly toward the ambulance that had just arrived. Paramedics rushed to take her, guiding her inside gently, carefully, whispering reassuring words. Tears blurred my vision. The officers escorted Megan outside next. Her face was streaked with tears and panic, her hair tangled, her breathing fast and uneven. "I was trying to help her," she cried, struggling against the officer's hold. "You don't understand, she needed me. They were going to take her away." Her words tumbled out in desperate, frantic bursts. She didn't have anywhere to go. I kept her safe. I kept her safe. But the officers didn't respond. They simply read her rights as she screamed and sobbed, her body collapsing into their grip. I stepped out of my car without realizing I'd moved. I couldn't get close. The police wouldn't have allowed it, but I stood just far enough that Megan saw me. Our eyes met. For a heartbeat, she froze. All the rage, guilt, and panic in her face shifted into something else. Pain maybe. Or shame. Or a realization that everything she'd buried was now exposed to the world. She whispered something. I couldn't hear what, but her knees buckled, and the officers had to steady her before guiding her into the patrol car. She never looked up again. The sirens finally began to wail, filling the once quiet neighborhood with a piercing cry. People stirred behind their curtains. Doors opened. Neighbors stepped onto porches with expressions of shock, curiosity, or disbelief. But I didn't see any of them. All I saw was the ambulance door shutting gently, the missing child now safe inside. All I heard was my granddaughter's trembling voice replaying in my mind. "Please don't tell Mom I told you." The last thing I felt, standing on that cold street as dusk turned to night, was the crushing, devastating truth. My son's home, once filled with love, had become a place of secrets, fear, and unimaginable darkness. And the worst was still not over. The hours that followed felt unreal, like I was drifting through someone else's life. The flashing lights faded from the street. Neighbors retreated into their homes. The ambulance disappeared with the little girl, and the patrol cars followed soon after, taking Megan away. And then silence. A heavy, aching silence that settled over everything. I drove home in that silence, gripping the steering wheel with numb fingers. I didn't cry on the way back. I didn't scream. I didn't feel relief, not yet. Shock wrapped around me like a cold blanket, dulling every emotion into something distant and unreachable. When I stepped into my house, Lily was sitting on the couch, cradling Barnaby in her lap. Her eyes were wide with worry. "Grandma," she whispered. "Is Mom okay?" For a moment I couldn't speak. I sank down beside her and pulled her gently into my arms. She rested her head on my chest, listening to the uneven rhythm of my heartbeat. "Sweetheart," I said softly. "Your mom, she needs help. And she's going to get it now." Lily didn't say anything. She just nodded, as though she had known for a long time something was wrong, but hadn't had the words to explain it. She tightened her arms around me, and I held her until her breathing slowed. The next morning, I received a call from the police. The little girl found in the basement, the one from the footage, was now safe at the hospital. Malnourished, frightened, but alive. Miraculously alive. Her family had been notified. Her mother had screamed when the officers told her the news. One of them described her scream as the kind that breaks something inside you. I sat down on my kitchen chair, gripping the edges of the table as tears finally spilled down my cheeks. Gratitude, grief, confusion, all tangled together. The officer also told me that Megan was being evaluated and questioned. They believed she hadn't intended to hurt the child, but instead had taken her believing she was saving her from imagined threats. A tragic, broken logic only visible through the cracks of a mind crumbling under years of untreated grief. My heart twisted at that. Memories of the woman she had once been. The one who used to bring me flowers, who laughed with me on summer evenings, flickered painfully in my mind. Later that afternoon, as I walked Lily to school, something unexpected happened. Parents, those same people who had whispered about me, pitied me, questioned my sanity, approached with hesitant expressions. "Clara, we're so sorry. We didn't know. You did the right thing." One by one they spoke, offering apologies, warm touches on my arm, even tears. I nodded graciously each time. But inside, I felt strangely hollow. Vindication didn't bring comfort. It didn't erase the image of that terrified girl, or the memory of Megan's collapse on the porch as officers took her away. Still, their words helped stitch together some of the wounds their doubt had carved into me. That evening, Lily came home with a drawing from school, a new one. It wasn't dark or frightening. It showed two figures holding hands in a field of flowers. One tall, one small, and above them, a bright yellow sun. "That's us," she said. And for the first time in days, I felt myself breathe deeply, fully. The healing wouldn't be quick. Not for Lily, not for the rescued child, not for Megan, and not for me. But healing had begun, quietly, like the first soft light before sunrise. As I tucked Lily into bed that night, she pressed Barnaby into my hands and whispered, "Grandma, thank you for listening." I kissed her forehead, swallowing the lump in my throat. "You were very brave, sweetheart," I murmured. "And you're safe now. I promise." She fell asleep against my arm, and I sat beside her long after her breathing turned steady, watching her peaceful face as if memorizing every detail. The storm had passed, but its lessons, its scars, would stay with me forever. In the quiet weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting more than I ever had in my 68 years. I would sit on my porch in the evenings listening to the crickets, watching the sky shift from gold to indigo, and think about how close I came to staying silent, how close I came to believing the lies whispered about me. It would have been easier to doubt myself, easier to shrink under the weight of judgment, easier to pretend nothing was wrong. But silence, especially the silence of someone who senses danger, can cost lives. I thought about my son often during those weeks. I imagined what he would have said if he were still here, if he'd known what Lily was going through, what Megan had spiraled into. I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that he would have thanked me for fighting, for pushing through humiliation, fear, and isolation to protect the little girl he loved most in this world. Sometimes bravery isn't loud. Sometimes it isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's just a trembling hand reaching for a phone, choosing to make a call you wish you never had to make. And sometimes that single act can pull a child out of darkness. I learned that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage whispers, "Do it anyway." To anyone listening to my story, I want you to remember this. When something feels wrong, truly deeply wrong, don't ignore it. Don't let shame, rumors, or fear convince you that your instincts don't matter. They do. More than you know. And now, I want to ask you something, genuinely, from my heart to yours. What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have stayed quiet to keep the peace? Or would you have stepped into the storm, even knowing people might judge you, mock you, or turn their backs on you? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to hear your thoughts.